right. Today we are talking about how to retire without running out of money. And for many of our listeners, they're not necessarily concerned about running out of money, but how do I use money in a way that creates freedom, both in my current circumstance, but also as I'm thinking ahead about a time where I'm maybe less involved in the operations of my business, or I've fully retired, or I've had an exit from a business event. I don't have to work anymore, right? So we're talking about money as its purpose in your life and how to make sure, number one, you don't run out. But then when you've crossed off that concern, what are kind of the next approaches and mindset shifts that we can when we talk about money?
Yeah. So we've had a number of clients, as this is a very real situation, that they have plenty of resources. They have a good future ahead of them, but they just have a hard time living into their freedom, living into their finances, because there's this back of the mind concern that they might run out. And because of that, they're sitting on, 8-9 million, which, a lot of people say, wow, that's a lot of money. But whether it's 1 million or more, 8 million, that sentiment is still there. That sentiment is still, am I being wise? Am I going to run out? Can we really afford to take that trip? Can we really afford to help the kids? And we have some strategies that we use to get people through that. But that's that's the starting point here today.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people, I mean, they have, getting back to one of your points there, Jeremiah, I think the historical aspects, we have clients who either have parents, they experienced the Depression, they woke up one day and the life was completely different. And I think also the media is a big contributor to the uncertainty of the future. And so people look at, all this stuff coming at them saying, but most of this, as we know, it's marketing their product or something. But people have this, the marketers go to what I would say the fear point. If it bleeds, it leads. And people get focused on it. All the upheaval that's going on politically, but also they just have uncertainty about the future. And what we're trying to do is to give people certainty. You've got enough, and this is how we're structured for you so you can live the life that you want to live.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some spending habits and maybe some withdrawal strategies that are beneficial in retirement and also don't continue to preserve your wealth to stretch it over your lifetime. So when we talk about some of the concerns that retirees have, what are some of the concerns that we hear on a regular basis?
Yeah, I think the first one often is, I don't want to run out. Do I have enough? And for all of these, the initial process that we have is a plan, right? We want a plan that lays out all the expenses, it lays out all the income, it lays out all the rainy days. What if this happens? What if that happens? Right? To really stress test it. But what I hear is concerns: will I run out? And then once we've answered that, then what are my taxes going to be? Am I going to get hammered in taxes? What account should I pull from, and when? I think those are big ones. And then the last one I tend to hear is what ifs. And everyone's got different what ifs. A lot of them tend to be, what if someone gets sick? What if there's care costs? What if we decide to move? What if we want to help our kids in this way or that way? So those are the ones I tend to hear a lot is the, will we run out? What are the taxes? Where do I get the money from? And what if this happens?
And I think you have to prioritize those. In other words, healthcare delivery is a higher priority than taking care of your children. Travel, I think that falls behind, travel falls behind that. So I think you have to prioritize, and make sure there's enough money set aside for those things that have the higher priority as far as the needs. Yeah, I mean, because we don't know. Healthcare is one of the biggest concerns that we have, healthcare delivery. But you've seen within the practice, most of our clients have healthcare delivery. It's different than what they expected it to be. And I think that's important. We're not seeing all of a sudden you get this massive bill every month and you don't have the money set aside to deal with it. So it's just, the implementation of it is just different than what a lot of people expect.
Right. And I'm going to take a little bit of a different take on it because there's kind of what I would call a hidden risk, which is that we have the perceived risks, right? They might have a fear of something that they've heard. They might have a fear of a continuation of government benefits, whether or not that's Medicare or Social Security. We've been talking to our clients a lot about that. Those are overt fears or concerns. But there's also some fears that are hidden, which is if we are constantly concerned about if our money is going to last us our whole lifetime, then we might miss out on making a choice to do something that we've really always wanted to do. an experience, a memory, traveling, purchasing a home, or adding on to our home for the purposes of being able to have more people over to our house, right? There are some valuable items and they're all custom and they're unique. And it requires our clients to be really closely aligned with those goals and those values that they hold that maybe they don't talk a lot about. Because, there's so many people who just think, okay, we've got all of our have tos, right? And after we get through all of our have tos, then we get to our get tos. And what if all your have tos never run out, right? They just keep going because ultimately there's a lot of uncertainty. Even as planners, we love planning. We can use averages, we can use context, we can use information, we can take all the data and compile it together and come up with a really educated guess, right? And plan accordingly. But ultimately, right, life is going to play out in all different ways with all sorts of curveballs. It's dynamic.
Yeah, and clients want certainty. And what you just emphasized, Laura, is that we can't provide absolute certainty. And any of the instruments out there that people would go to that, let's say an insurance product that would provide certainty, well, you're accepting a very, very moderate, if not a low, below market rate of return on your money. And that's not a good outcome either. So
yeah, and even on the actual accounts, whether it's a investment account or an annuity or an insurance product, even getting beyond just what's the actual flow going to be, but what do you need? People ask, what if I get sick? What if I have this? And Laura, to your comment, one of my favorite parts of going to do the planning meeting with folks is when we build the plan and we have it built in, it lines up with our life, and then we start doing all the what ifs. What if you get sick and need more care? What if this Social Security goes away? What if we put all those things in there? And even though it's not absolute certainty, I love it when we still look at like the range, the band of likely outcomes, and it's massively okay, right? And having a client see that for the first time and realize, and we talk about what else could you throw at this? What else could go wrong? What else are you worried about? What about inflation? Let's put that in there. We put in all the different concerns and then still see your plan still is functional. And it allows, I think, in the moment in that meeting for them to think about, well, I really did want to go through the Panama Canal someday. I've always thought that was really neat. And I've never really said that because I didn't think it was like fair or reasonable to kind of voice that. But in some of those meetings, I'll start voicing these desires that, like you said, Laura, if you can model out what all the have tos are and actually view them, then get back to the present day and say, hey, here's some space. It's really resourceful for folks. And with that, often
I was going to say, what we're talking about here is kind of a categorization, right? You've got your core lifestyle needs. We want to make sure those are met. Number one, right? And then you get to play with this discretionary freedom spending. Now, you're only going to truly feel that freedom. We don't get to wave a magic wand and just create that for you, but you're probably not going to be released to feel that sense of freedom until your core basic needs are met. And not just for today, but when we look at our plan for the duration of our life, right? Then we get to look at this kind of added layer of like, okay, I've got some discretionary spending here. What's my responsibility? What do I want to enjoy? What do I want to do? And oftentimes we find that people make these plans for retirement, and maybe they take that trip to Panama and they realize, I really don't like traveling. Right?
Right.
Or
like
our clients
and bugs. I mean, I get it.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Discovering a little bit. And I think my fun part of that is often we'll create not just an open-ended do whatever you want, but a spending plan that says, hey, with all your base needs met, all your expenses built in the plan, if you were to spend an extra X amount of dollars for the next 8 years doing fun things, traveling with the kids, whatever it may be, you realize that's functional within your plan. Then it becomes the fun of, where do you go? And I've shared this story with various clients, but we had a client years ago that they went to Italy. They'd retired. They'd been planning this trip. They went there. They had a great time. They came home. And I asked, great, could you do that again next year? Could you go again? Because you still have more in your spending plan for next year. Do you want to go back to Italy? They both shook their heads and said, no way. Like, it was fun, but the amount of time and effort, they just realized, as you said, Lori, it was something they wanted to do once, but it was not a recurring thing. But that same group found an RV tour that they started doing with some other friends, and they loved it. And they said, we could do that every year. So
I think
love
of
it
our
when
clients who recently bought a sailboat, and then all of a sudden our office got notified maybe 6 months later that they were insuring a different boat. And I remember asking, wait a second, there's a different boat? And it was because they bought their first sailboat. It was something they waited for, they anticipated, they loved it until they figured out, well, we really want that one. And so they had to swap, right? So anyways, twists and turns.
Yeah, and the freedom with planning, I think, allows them in that case. They didn't have to, ride their hands and think, oh, what are we going to do? How are we going to get this done? They knew within their plan that they could afford a boat, and they could afford this boat or that boat. So it was a very easy transition for them. And I think that's kind of living into the freedom of their life to discover what they want, but also to know financially that we're able to provide for what we need. So we're talking about experiences right now. The other ones that are really big, I think, as people really find value in their finances is the time that they're buying back. Some people want to retire early. Other people want to be able to spend it with family. And the other one is legacy. Both of those are big deals. They're not just what do you want to experience in the next few years, but what do you want to be building and doing even in your retirement years? And legacy to me, often means, passing the next generation. It also means supporting the next generation now. It also means your own communities. What charities, what nonprofits, what things are we wanting to leave an impact on as a couple? And those become part of that same conversation. Can we give in ways that we never thought we could? Are we able to do that in ways that we didn't while we were working? And those are great conversations to have.
Right.
Yeah, and legacy, I think the thing that really hits me is that it's a transition thing. It's not retirement. You're making a transition to something that you're contributing your time and energy to, and also your intellect. And it's not, you're not just all of a sudden you reach this retirement age and you're sitting back thinking you're going to travel or sit on the porch and do the rocking back and forth. Mm-hmm. Legacy means transition in my mind. It really means where you're putting your energy into something else that you feel is important. He says you get to select it. It's not put upon you. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some people that come and meet with us and they're talking about retiring and they've heard this idea of a 4% rule. And, this is something that's been talked about. It's been kind of industry jargon for a long time. And it's kind of like the assumption that as you move into retirement, if you were to withdraw at the rate of 4% from your retirement accounts and that were to subsidize your income into the household and meet your reoccurring expenses, that you would be in a good place. And the assumption is that you could, with taking on very little risk, get at least 4% return from the market on an annual basis. And so you don't have to dip into your capital, right? So you're basically just skimming off the account performance every year, or at least just 4%. And that's a good way to plan. And for some, right, it's not a one size fits all. For some, that might be a great kind of rule of thumb or back of the napkin calculation or a goal that they might set for themselves. I'll say for most, when they come to meet with us, it's different. Retirement planning is very complex. And so there's lots of different, I always use the term kind of like levers to use. And we're always talking about taxes. And these are sometimes like opportunities, right, to convert some funds into Roth or so that 4% withdrawal strategy is good for some, but it's not a one size fits all. So.
Yep. For sure. And I think a lot of people who've been really good savers, I think they're really surprised at all the retirement income that comes to them. They may have had a career in public service, so they have a really good pension. They then retire from that, and they went into business for themselves. They put money into retirement. They've got Social Security. I mean, all this income all of a sudden just starts pumping at you, and you're going, I never thought it'd be this much, Yep. And they just never thought about planning for the future, so to speak. But they were planners, and they did really good jobs in doing that, and they have a good cash flow. And and the way a lot of these are structured is that it doesn't stop. It just continues every single month, and their taxes are higher, right? So,
Yeah. But I like what Laura started early on of the almost the hidden fear of if someone's eating top ramen, as they enter into retirement, and then they realize 10 years later that now their RMDs kick in, just as an example, they turn, say 75 and the required minimum distributions start coming out of these accounts and they're overwhelmed with money. They just have too much income. They just can't turn it off and they don't need that much. And they realize, hey, for those last 5 to 10 years, they were living in a way that was limiting what they wanted. And now they're overwhelmed with money. And, we talk, Randy, you said a number of times, you can't take a U-Haul behind the hearse. You don't need to die with all this excess. But I think even before we even get to death, but just in your life, there's a great TED talk by Jane Fonda talking about the different seasons of our life, and one of her comments was retirement's not a footnote. People are living longer and longer, and so to have retirement for say 30 years is not unreasonable for people. So as they reinvent themselves, and you think about from retirement forward, if you had a clear sense of what your full income and assets were going to be, full sense of your spending needs, to not have income only when you're 90, but to use it when you're 60 and 70, and have energy and desires to go do things, to start new businesses. That's where I think it gets exciting.
And this to me is supported by an investment strategy that has both the short, mid, and long-term time horizons in play. And, that has to do with the style of investments made to make sure that there's never a cash crunch in the home. And the way that this relates to what we were talking about earlier was that idea of like, let's make sure we've got our basic needs covered. And then we can start to free up our headspace to think about what do we do with the excess. And, there's really three broad ideas or buckets when we're talking about kind of extra funds or anticipating having excess as you move into retirement, which is, your time capital. Time is a finite stamp. We only get 24 hours every day. As much and as hard as I try to squeeze more out of those 24 hours, right? There's only 24 of them. And our life there's a time stamp to it. And so we have an opportunity and a responsibility for the time that we have. How do you want to spend your time, both pre-retirement and post-retirement? And then we talk about, impact. This has to do with philanthropy for some, charitable giving. This has to do with creating a family legacy, right? What are the principles and potentially the capital, the literate cash capital that you would want to provide to charitable entities or to your family? And the third would be kind of lifestyle capital, which is that idea of like we're talking about getting a sailboat or getting the RV and joining a club. And what are the experiences that you long to have in your lifetime? And it's easy to just talk about them, right? But when are you ready to take action on them? When are you ready to set that date on the calendar or hit that savings goal so that then you're freed up to go do that thing, right? So talking about those ideas come into play with that kind of, I guess, freedom bucket, let's call it, of funds in your life.
Yep, I love that. I think one of the things we talk about is when someone's retiring with, say, 10 million, it's not just survival, right? That's not what we're looking at. We're looking at, what is about the freedom, the legacy, the strategy, all that you just spoke about, Laura. And I think it's such a beautiful moment to get to have those conversations with people, because those are some of the moments I feel like really make a difference in how they spend their time, how they spend their life, and the math that we do, the financial planning, the building models, the managing investments. All that can feel very clinical and what we're doing and mathematic, but when it becomes with real people being able to live into the freedom that they have, benefit their families, benefit their futures, enjoy what they've spent so many years working towards. It's a really a cool moment as a planner to get to be in that space and see someone really be excited about living into all that they can. I think it's a really cool moment.
Yeah, it's a wonderful space to be in when you talk to the client, and money is really for benefit. It is for benefit them, benefit their family, benefit organizations. Sometimes we enter into a conversation where there's never been a conversation with the family about money. It's control. It's kind of used as a weapon. And it's a hard conversation with somebody. Say, you're going to have a really hard retirement, because you're going to isolate yourself, and your money is not so valuable that you can get your way at every given point. It is something to be fertilized. It's something to be used in a way that will enhance relationships, will enhance the community that you're in. And people need to recognize that they're not going to die with this. They're not going to have anything they're going to take with them. So they have to be able to utilize and see the benefit that they have with the money they have and how they can benefit people around them. And that is so critically important in their psychology. Unfortunately, every once in a while, we run across a client who just is not, they don't want to give. And not, they're selfish. And I'm not sure how to have that hard conversation with them and saying, life is going to be really hard for you going forward. You've worked and worked and worked. I always love it when I had the conversation with a man and he was just ready to retire. And my conversation with him was, okay, have you thought about your transition? What's going to happen the day after you retire? You no longer go to the office. You have to hand in your keys. You're done. I said, what are you going to do? He said, well, I always thought that I would come home and help my wife run the house. And she was in the meeting. She looked at him and she said, you're going to what?
I don't think so.
She said, you're not doing anything like that.
She's like, I got to
I've
handle
run this household for decades without your help, and I don't need your help now. So it was a stark reality between the two of them, like clash. Right? You could almost hear the cymbals come together. Bam!
Yeah.
Here's a man that's had total control. He could do whatever he wanted. He could command people to do stuff. He could instruct people to do this, and he would get it done. All of a sudden, now he's going to pour all that towards his wife. And his wife goes, "Not on your life, bub." And so we had a long conversation about that transition. It was fun to be like the mouse in the corner on that one. But anyway, they worked it out.
Oftentimes, we're talking about principles and things that to our listeners, it's probably not the first time it's ever occurred to them. But if we don't prompt the conversation, if there's not a moment or space to have the conversation in a very honest and vulnerable place sometimes, right? It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. Even for us, if you don't make space in your life to sit down and communicate what your goals are or what's important to you, or even honestly, like your interests. Jeremiah and I are in a season of life raising our 4 kids, and they're young, and we're running a business, and we are loving every minute, but there's not a lot of margin. And if we're not intentional about creating that margin to even now sit down and say, well, what do you like doing? I don't know. I just do the next thing, right? So those finances are just an indicator of what your values are. And so a lot of these conversations holistically, I feel like are just aligning people's values, right? Did you know that when you're spending money here or investing it here or, et cetera, like this is what's being created, or this is the habit that we're seeing. And so we don't often have to force, a different sort of habit. It's often just kind of like an aha moment because they come to us with their values, our clients, and we're just trying to help build a financial structure that actually reflects it and supports it going forward. That's what I love doing.
Sure.
So,
yeah. That's really well said. Well, if this is helpful to anybody, I hope it is, that as you look at your retirement, you consider what's next to you. If you need help building a plan, if you need help having these deeper conversations in a safe space, we're happy to always engage with you on that front.
Tricord Advisors, your money's best ally. Till next week, folks, may you grow in wisdom and knowledge. Thank you for listening.
We have a few more things to let you know about before we go. Podcast reviews really help us to serve more people and get this information into the hands of the people who need it. Please leave us a review. Even if it's not 5 stars, we welcome the feedback.
And we invite you to let us know what topics you would like to hear more about, or what would benefit the people in your life who you're closest to. We have more resources online. Those resources are designed to help you share this great information easily with people in your life. To access those resources, please visit tricordadvisors.com.
Often we hear from clients that they wish they had talked to us sooner. If that's you, we'd be thrilled to see how financial planning can benefit your life. Email us at contact@tricordadvisors.com or simply click on the link in the show notes.
This show was produced by Graham Gardner at Model FA. Find out more about how to create a podcast for your financial planning business by visiting modelfa.com. We love creating content that's useful, resourceful, and maybe even a little entertaining. We want to make this mega universe of financial topics and advice applicable and helpful to your life.
Remember, at Tricord Advisors, we are your future's best ally.